So the last few weeks we've been talking about Lakota star knowledge and the ways that earthly ceremonies are tied to celestial movements and what the significance is of that for Lakota people. So this lecture today is just going to go into a little bit more detail, and some of that will be a little bit repetitive because some of the things that we'll talk about are in the chapters of the Goodman book, Lakota Star Knowledge, that you have on D2L. We know that a lot of the stories about the star world are centered around a personage or spirit named Fallen Star, whose mother, and of course this is again very, very long ago, mother was Lakota, was looking up at the stars one night and fell in love with one of the stars and wished she was with her friends. She wished that she could marry that star and go live in the star world. And lo and behold, the next day, a couple young men appeared to the women and said that they were from the star world and that they had come to take them back to be their wives. And so these two Lakota young women went to the star world and became the wives of the star men and lived with the other star people. But there came a time when one of the women was pregnant, and she had actually been digging turnips, and in doing so she had opened up a rupture between the earth world and the star world. And as she gazed down through that hole, she saw basically her people, her village, her relatives, and all of the earthly goings on, and became very, very homesick for where she came from. And so over time she braided together these turnip stalks until they were long enough, or at least she thought they were long enough, to lower her back down so she could see her people and her family. But you know, as she was descending, the rope broke and she fell, and she didn't survive that, but her child did. And her child, Fallen Star, was then raised by meadowlarks. And even today, the story tells us that meadowlarks speak Lakota. So the meadowlark raised Fallen Star until he was old enough to travel to the different communities, the different Lakota communities and bands. And everywhere he went, as the book tells us, he was revered and honored and welcomed. So he became a very important part of Lakota society, to the point where he was sort of called upon in times of need. At Black Elk Peak, there was a story about a big red predatory bird that was swooping down and stealing children and carrying them back up to the top of this mountain forever, taking them from the people. And the people called on Fallen Star, and he replied, "You are my relatives, and I will take care of you." And so he came and he shot an arrow into this red bird that was so menacing. And then he took the spirits of all of the little children that had been taken, and he threw them up into the sky. And the people say that that's what became the Pleiades, or the seven sisters in the sky. And another story takes place at Matotipila, what's now Devil's Tower National Monument, this amazingly dramatic butte that just juts out of the earth. I think it's something like 1,400 feet high. But the Lakota story tells us that Fallen Star commanded the earth to rise when two children were being chased by a hungry bear, and they were too far away from their village for the people to help them. So he told them to run to this grassy knoll, and then he commanded the earth to rise. And according to Lakota tradition, it rose up very high and saved the children from the claws of the hungry bear. The striations, or the grooves in the side of the butte, they say are the claws of this bear who frantically tried to get to these children but was unable to do so. So Fallen Star is really a central figure in Lakota stories about the Black Hills. And, you know, as we learned with Mircea Eliade, the religious historian, there are places on the earth that for ancient communities or indigenous people that have been in certain places for a long time, they become the center of everything for the people. And that's what the Pahasapa or the Black Hills are for Lakota peoples. They are the heart of everything. And the Lakota peoples travel from far distances to go to the Black Hills for all kinds of ceremonies. I'm gonna let you watch this video of Vine Deloria. I'm gonna pass through it and let you guys watch that. But it's a very important video where Vine Deloria tells about the meaning behind what's now Devil's Tower National Monument and why it's so hard to explain to non-Native people why certain places have a power that's indescribable but very palpable and noticeable, and why that's so hard to explain to people that are not accustomed to that idea that some places have power of their own, and that when you enter into the sphere of these places, it should be under the supervision of a medicine man. So he makes the case that Matotipila is that kind of place. So a little bit of the history of the Lakotas and the Black Hills. We know that they entered into agreements, treaties with the United States in 1851 and 1868, both called Fort Laramie Treaty. The 1868 version of it reduced the land base by pretty significantly from 1851, but it guaranteed that the Black Hills would remain part of Lakota original homeland and that there would not be any white settlements permitted there. In 1874, the treaty was violated by Lieutenant Colonel Custer when he led the expedition because they had heard that there was gold in those hills, and he led an expedition in violation of the treaty. In 1987, a federal judge awarded Lakota peoples $107 million based on a decision that the Black Hills had been unlawfully seized against the treaty. So they set a price of what the Black Hills would have cost at that point and added compounded interest to that and came up with $107 million, which, as we know, the tribe, the people, refused that money, saying that the Black Hills are not for sale. In 2007, that total had grown to $750 million. In 2011, the total had approached $1 billion that sits in trust with the United States government, and today it's approaching $2 to $2.5 billion. To date, the Lakota peoples have refused to take the money. There is no monetary compensation for sacred land, according to them. So this is a rendition of the Black Hills that corresponds almost exactly with a celestial body in the sky. And as we know, Lakota peoples follow the movements of the sun as it makes its way through the Lakota constellations, and what they observe in the sky, they then mirror on the earth. So this is a quick review of Bears Lodge Multiple Use Association versus Babbitt. Babbitt was the head of the Department of the Interior, which oversees the National Park Service when this lawsuit came to be. So the National Park Service issued a Final Climbing Management Plan, FCMP, in 1995. And in December of that year, they also issued a decision that that revoked or removed the commercial climbing ban. So remember, when the National Park Service was approached by Lakota ceremonial people, they asked them to institute a ban on climbing during the month of June so that they could hold their Sundance at the site of this ancient pilgrimage. The National Park Service initially agreed and issued a climbing management plan, but then they were sued by commercial climbers represented by Mountain States Legal Fund, who said that was a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which says that the government will not establish religion in any public land. So in this case, the climbers contended that the National Park Service had stepped outside of the bounds imposed by law in the First Amendment of the Constitution. They alleged that the NPS plan wrongfully promoted religion in violation of the Establishment Clause. One of the things that they misunderstood, and I do have some artifacts here from the actual court case, is that because the Lakota medicine people had to frame their argument in terms that the court could negotiate around, there was a lot of mistranslation about what this site means to Lakota and other indigenous communities. So they had to frame their argument in terms of prayer or praying. And they had to say that this is a sacred place where they go to pray. The word Wachekie in Lakota actually means to make a relative, which is an acknowledgement that all living things are related. But the early missionaries mistranslated Wachekie to pray. And so that terminology made its way into the Bears Lodge case. And the defendants had to frame their argument about the importance of Matotipila or Devil's Tower to Lakota peoples in those terms. They also tried to bring in the argument of the medicine wheel or Changleshka, which is the unending circle of time, space, matter, and spirit. As you can see, this shows or depicts the 4 sacred directions, the 4 colors, the 4 winds, the number 4 being of huge significance. Since you've already watched Ocheti Shakawing, they talk about the number 4 as a very important number for Lakota peoples. Also, to try to get across that Matotipila or Devil's Tower is a place of Wakan or power. That again, when you watch that Vine Deloria little video there in the middle of this, you'll understand what he means when he talks about places that have power of their own. So the defendants, in trying to get the court to understand that power that's present there, they had to frame their argument in a way that used sort of religious rites as the framework. So this is the closest that the Lakota peoples got in sort of getting their point across. So this is Arvel Looking Horse. He's the 19th keeper of the Sacred Bundle and the Buffalo Calf Pipe. For the Lakota peoples, he said, we seek visions at Matotipila by fasting and praying, and note that he used the word praying there. The climber's presence and the noise and serious distractions they cause interfere with our traditional religious and cultural ceremonies. And this, I felt, was the best way he could come up with to describe what the implications are when they see climbers, pounding pitons and bolts into the side of this butte. He said it affects us psychologically and spiritually when non-Indian climbers see us and come near us when we have ceremonies and pray. When people climb on this sacred butte and hammer metal objects into it, the butte is defiled. And this is my emphasis, but he said this in his testimony. It is like they pounded something into our bodies. Again, speaking to that non-hierarchical relationality that is so much a part of a traditional indigenous worldview. This is from the United States District Court for the District of Wyoming, an affidavit of Arvel Licking Horse and Roman Spare Stop. Okay, so this is from the reading Lakota Star Knowledge. You can see that Devil's Tower lies slightly outside of what is now Black Hills National Forest, but each of the sacred places where the Lakota ceremonial specialists go from the spring equinox to the summer solstice are marked here. And according to the astronomers that contributed with Ronald Goodman to Lakota Star Knowledge, this spring journey began 3,000 years ago. From the spring equinox to the summer solstice, the sun travels through 4 Lakota constellations, and the people then do the same thing as they follow the sun. On Earth, though, the buffalo is the embodiment of the power of the sun. So in following the buffalo, the Lakota were following the sun on Earth. And following the sun and the buffalo was part of living in balance with the powers of the universe. So again, this constant mirroring that Lakota tradition holds is that as above, so below. So there is no barrier or boundary between the star world and this world. And the ceremonies that take place in the star world are mirrored on the earth. You have read also about the star and the earth maps that were on hides and kept by an elder. And Ronald Goodman was surprised to find that the two maps are exactly the same because they're just depicting a mirror image for Lakota peoples. So in this way, you could say that the constellations are actually the visible scriptures of Lakota peoples. Again, this is from Lakota Star Knowledge, and you can just go back and review this. This shows where this contingency of ceremonial specialists go and at what time of a year they're there, what it is that the ceremony is invoking, and what the importance of that invocation is on behalf of the people. So Vine Deloria says you can basically go to sacred lands to mine. You can go to sacred lands to for whatever reason, but if you go to these places to pray for the continued fertility of the earth, somehow you're running up against the needs and desires of the dominant population. And so Charlotte Black Elk, who is the granddaughter of Black Elk from Black Elk Speaks, testified, I think it's, in 1984. So I'll give you just a minute to read part of her testimony here. And Wakan Tonka basically translates as the great power. So Matotipila is well attested as an ancient Sundance site. The ceremony that's held at Black Elk Peak is called They Are Dancing for the Thunders That Are Theirs. And if you remember from our discussion about Crazy Horse, he was considered a thunder being, a Wakian, which is a spiritual power which manifests itself through thunder and lightning. Remember that after his vision, when he would go into battle, he would paint hailstones over his chest, a lightning bolt. His horse would have a lightning bolt and hailstones. He would have one hawk feather as opposed to the huge eagle headdress, and one stone tied behind his ear. And again, was considered by his people to be Wakian. This describes how at the height of the ceremony, the three peaks in the Black Hills change their meaning. So during the ceremony at Matotipila, the names of three places are changed. So Devil's Tower becomes Gray Buffalo Horn. Peishla or Iyankaga becomes the Black Buffalo Horn. And Bear Butte becomes Pte Puteya, the Buffalo's Nose. The triangle that's formed is called the Buffalo's Head. And during the ceremonial period, the head becomes spiritually alive. So we know up to this day, and again, I finished my doctoral dissertation years ago, but I spent many summers interviewing climbers there. And we know that the resolution that happened when the Supreme Court refused to hear the case and kicked it back to the Wyoming Circuit Court, which had found that making the ban voluntary did not establish religion. It was an accommodation of Indian ceremonial practices. That resolution has not necessarily curbed every year the influx of climbers at Matotipila. And also keep in mind that at the other national monument in the Black Hills, it's absolutely forbidden. You can end up with a fine or a prison sentence for climbing at Mount Rushmore National Monument, but climbing is completely fine at the first national monument. So that's something to think about as well. The argument, as I said, of the plaintiffs was that the government should not establish religion in any national park or monument. So that NPS being sued for what they said they actually were establishing Indian religion, and yet you have an organization called a Christian ministry in national parks where you will have Christian services out in the open there, all over national parks. They're at Yellowstone, Glacier, Yosemite, you name it. This Christian ministry is allowed to do that in public lands. Arlington National Cemetery is our nation's most described in the pamphlets as our nation's most sacred shrine, and anyone who enters must remain completely silent and solemn in this sacred space. Tumakakori National Historic Park holds a high mass, and a high mass is with bishops and all of the Catholic parts of that. They hold a high Catholic mass at this National Historic Park, have never been questioned as violating the Establishment Clause. And at San Antonio Missions Historic National Park, there's a Christmas pageant that happens in December every year where they reenact the Christian Christmas story. So again, the final climbing management plan, it was determined that the ban, voluntary ban, is an accommodation of Native religion, not an establishment. So in the case, no historical ceremonial evidence was permissible, so they couldn't bring in any of the historic information about this sacred pilgrimage that goes from one spot to the other within the Black Hills and why the Lakota peoples need unhindered access to that site. There was no mention of the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty that guaranteed this land to Lakota peoples, and of course no mention of the settlement that the federal judge found estimated today at $2 billion. So whether or not the course was adjudicated completely fairly is for your own opinion, but it's important to remember that as we continue to look at Lakota obligations and ceremonies to the Black Hills.